Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you.
So I wanted to share that song with you all because, of course, you're a child of this universe, and knowing that you're one with the sky, with the earth, with the trees, with the grass, knowing there's no boundaries to you and the sacred in life, in nature. It's easy to experience this as we look out into nature when we're experiencing this oneness. Often where we get hung up, where we hit a snag, is when we start looking at certain, perhaps difficult situations, people, conditions in our lives, where we compartmentalize those as not sacred or wrong or bad, hurtful, outside of that. And so tonight we're going to explore widening our circle, opening our hearts even more, including those situations in a way that we can find a way to honor, to open our hearts more, to feel more compassion, and to see what gift there was, what lesson there was in and through that situation for us, allowing us to experience greater wholeness in and through that process of opening to all. Our lives are all divided, aren't they? We have our spiritual life through our spiritual practice, through coming to church. We have our work life, we have vacation, recreation, and society also compartmentalizes our lives, our experiences. We separate the sacred to church, the secular in commerce. And we see this in how there are businesses that are profit-making, that they're focusing on their business interests, and they seem to be divorced from the way that they are using the resources of the earth and the environment on which they depend, and not recognizing the sacred and the oneness there in the harmony of the two. Right? We have such a strong habit in and through the way that we've been socialized to divide up life. So it's no wonder that we experience separation everywhere that we look. There's a statement of ancient wisdom, as within, so without. This is a wisdom that's been with us for eons, right? So it's not just what we're seeing outside of ourselves. We understand that what we're seeing, the separation we're seeing, is a reflection, a mirroring back of how we also compartmentalize our innermost life. In spiritual practice, we can continue this pattern of fragmentation. So this is a continuation of the work that we've been studying in A Path with Heart, Jack Kornfield's book. We're on chapter 13 tonight. So he's focusing here on recognizing where in our inner life we have compartmentalized. So we may see certain prayers, certain meditations, spiritual practices as what we consider sacred, spiritual. And then the rest of us is left out. So what about, the person that goes out to the bar for a drink, or the person who, goes and hangs out with your family, or whatever, how we show up in different parts of our lives. We go, well, maybe that's not the sacred part of me. This is the sacred part that shows up to do the spiritual practice, and then I have kind of these other experiences that I may see as other and not incorporate them into awareness of all of me as that sacred life. So I want to illustrate this to you by a story that Jack Kornfield shares about a Buddhist teacher that he knew that was in Thailand. He met in Thailand when he was there, when he was practicing as a monk. And this man was a 44-year-old Burmese monk, and his story demonstrates the power of compartmentalizing our spiritual life and how it can take over our choices. This man was involved in the pro-democracy upheavals and demonstrations that were happening in Rangoon at that time. And after years of difficulty, he fled for his life. And he fled into Burma and Thailand, and he was serving as a monk in the border refugee camps there. And he was teaching the Dharma to these people who were often starving. They were often sick from diseases where, tropical diseases, where they were not receiving the medical treatments and medications that they needed. And yet, he was a beacon of light for these people. He stayed steadfast in his faith and his ability to lead them as a spiritual teacher. He taught the Dharma, and he taught them to live with compassion, to support justice, and to face these tremendous hardships that these people were facing. And during this time where he was serving at these border refugee camps, he met this young Thai woman. She was in her 20s. And first she came to him as a student, and she came to support him. She brought him offerings and food, as monks, received food as offerings. And over time, they gradually fell in love. He fell in love with this young woman. He was a monk. And even though he was just not trying to do that, he was just being a good teacher to her, available to her, and his passion came forward. They both developed a love for each other. And the next that Jack heard about this monk, a few months later, the monk decided that he was going to immolate himself. So he was going to burn himself on the steps of the Burmese embassy in Bangkok as a protest to the great injustices that were happening in these border camps that he was working in throughout his country. And so when Jack found out about this, because this is his friend, he did not want to lose his friend, and he certainly didn't want to lose him to burning himself in a fire, burning himself in protest. He went to talk to him. What's up? What's up with this? This is pretty extreme. And so he found out that the real reason that this monk was doing this, why do you think? Because he's in love with the woman, the young woman, and he couldn't deal with his feelings. He'd been a monk since he was 14. And he didn't know what life would be like if he left his order and got married. And he didn't have any skills besides being a monk. And so, since he didn't know what to do with it, he just decided he would die. And so Jack had a talk with him. He talked him through it, and he said, there is a way for you to continue to do your work and come to peace with these feelings that you are feeling, with the intensity of this passion that he was separating outside the sacred. He had compartmentalized it, and it had taken over his life to the point that he was going to kill himself. So this is a pretty intense of his shame. He didn't know what to do with it. So just recognizing that there was a shift here. So the monk decided not to do this act, that listening to Jack's coaching, he recommitted himself to his practice and his teaching, and he chose to focus on the practice of the heart where he was able to incorporate his personal passion as well as his passion for teaching the Dharma to his students. And by doing that, what happened was that the woman was asked to leave for a cooling off period so that he could have space to do this. And it ended up that they ended their relationship. And he was able to continue as a teacher in a more holistic way. And it grew him in a way that nothing else could. So we want to recognize that when we compartmentalize something outside of the sacred, a situation, experience, a personal dynamic, that this can become a strong force. It can become a shadow force in our consciousness that is easy to find a spiritual reason. He had a spiritual reason, right, for doing this act where he was going to burn himself up, to come up with some spiritual reason to reinforce this separation that you experience within yourself. So notice how that might show up in you in another way. We can notice how this shows up in modern ecology when we see the way that we use the earth for our means in a way that is out of balance. And so the earth is responding, right? We use vast amounts of oil, vast amounts of pesticides, of fertilizers to maximize the yield, right? We want to have more energy, more cars, more travel, more food. When we cut down rainforests, when we do all this, we can come to understand that these elements that we are using and abusing are actually elements that create our bodies, that we have a relationship with these elements of the earth, that they are not outside of the sacred, right? I read an article recently from a magazine called Texas Journey, and the gentleman that was being interviewed, his name was William Wren, and he was talking about how in Texas, in our area of Texas, we are losing starry nights because it's not getting dark enough. It's just not dark enough. So all the stars that are there that we used to be able to see some 100, 150 years ago, we're not seeing them all anymore. Many people I hear about who like to go out to the hill country or out into western Texas just to be able to see the stars, so we're not able to see them here, and of course from light pollution. And some of that light pollution is coming from these oil rigs, is what he is focusing his social work on, changing the bright lighting on oil rigs so that we can have these darker skies. And he said that there are so many reasons why we need the darkness. We actually need the darkness for the order of nature, for predators to seek their prey, and just all of life needs actually some time in sacred darkness. So we can recognize too in our spiritual practice how we can embrace the darkness and where we're trying to exclude the darkness and be in light. What he shared, which I thought was really fascinating, was in 1889, Van Gogh painted the painting Starry Night. You know that painting with the stars and the swish, and he was in an asylum and he was looking out and he painted what his expression of what he saw, and he was so inspired by these stars. And William Wren said that he went and researched this area of France where Van Gogh was when he painted that painting, and from space you see this bright glow of yellow light there. And so what he said was that most likely that painting wouldn't be painted today, because in that area of France, you wouldn't see all those stars. So he said for us to consider what we're losing by losing the experience of the darkness at night, where we can see the lush display of stars. It allows us to remember our interconnection with all life. Many of us come to spiritual practice because we've experienced trauma and pain in our lives, and spiritual practice can at first seem like a wonderful escape, a way to come into peace, to put aside those experiences, to experience the presence of God, to go on vision walks and just open our imaginations to other experiences within an expansive awareness. And as we attempt to escape the pain of the past, to escape the loneliness of what feels like an experience that maybe no one else can understand, are we really taking steps towards our freedom? Or are we strengthening the fear, the limitation, the aversion by compartmentalizing, again, that experience as not part of the sacred? So if freedom is not found in the escape from all of that, from the pain, the trauma, the troubles of the world, where is freedom found? What does Buddhism tell us about where freedom is found? Well, the Buddha told us that both human suffering and human enlightenment are found when we bring our attention to the body with its senses and mind. That sounds really simple, right? But how often do we go into spiritual practice and I'm focused on my breath and centered, I feel relaxed, and your mind I want to work on some more complicated things than this. This is just, I got this breathing thing, and our minds want to go into something else, right? We get into the abstract rather than grounding in what is right here and right now, and then we lose the experience of the body. And it's in that present experience of the body that we awaken, that we find liberation. We've become very disconnected as a society from our bodies. We live very often in our minds. And we know we really only have now awakening to where we experience no boundaries. The sacred only ever happens in the now. And so the Buddha is teaching us, through this Dharma teaching, to use our awareness of the body to keep coming back to the breath, to the sensations of the body, to allowing feelings, emotions to be present without compartmentalizing them. Oh, well, I will deal with that later when I have time to grieve. I will deal with that later when I have time to whatever. And we think we're putting it aside, and it's operating in us unconsciously, right? So we know that this is not easy. This is not easy to just say, okay, now I'm going to not be divided, and I'm going to be just fully present and see the truth. So that's why we call it a practice, right? We keep coming back to it. Because if we don't, we unknowingly can slip into our early childhood patterns of strategy, of responding to life that worked for us. They were effective strategies, and we can say thank you. Thank you for getting me through that situation, for allowing me to figure out how I needed to respond to that situation to maybe survive or to get my needs met, right? To recognize that there were patterns that helped us through some dysfunction we may have experienced in our childhood. But if we continue to hide those patterns in our spiritual lives, they will continue to divide our life. So one of the means that I have used in my life to become more aware of that is through 12-step recovery in ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, which gave me the opportunity to speak about areas of my life. My parents are divorced, and so that was, of course, a traumatic experience for me. I moved to another state. My parents separated, and to have a place where there were others who understood what those dynamics are like and how you feel separated from a parent and all that, to have a safe place to speak those things, which as a child, I compartmentalized all that. I had to go to school and get good grades and all that, and I was focusing on that, and I wasn't really dealing with that because I didn't even know I had to deal with that because I was a kid. So as an adult, it's not like it goes away. It becomes unconscious until we decide that, okay, now it's time to do the work so that I can really know my wholeness and I can know the truth about who I am. So the key to healing these patterns is to see that spirituality is continually moving away from this compartmentalization and separation towards an embracing of all life. And yes, embracing that difficult family dynamic or that difficult person or situation, or that it could be when you were an adult. That's not to say that we only had trauma as children. We certainly have had enough traumatic experiences with Hurricane Harvey and different events that have happened here in Houston just in the last few years that we can see, where am I compartmentalizing that, and where can I find wholeness and forgiveness as I bring that into my awareness of the sacred. So rather than just try to rise above, which we call like spiritual bypassing, rise above these patterns and just feel like, oh, I'm the better person, it's something that we tell ourselves, right? We go into it, we go through it, and we bring those situations, those people, those conditions into our hearts, into our heart space. And so being willing to go into the dark, to go into the darkness within, those dark areas where we feel weakness, where we feel rage, where we feel disconnected, insecure about ourselves, not enough, because of something that happened or something that we told ourselves about happened, where we are walling ourselves off, where we have segmented a part of ourselves within ourselves. And so when we see how these ideas about ourselves are limited, are false, are not serving us anymore, and we can hold that in compassion and love, that is when our world expands and we awaken to seeing more of the God, of the sacred, of the divine that life is. So I invite you into embracing this process as part of your spiritual practice and knowing your wholeness and knowing for yourself that truly there are no boundaries to the sacred, yes, even in that situation in your life. Namaste.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.